All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. There should be a few more people joining us for lunch, and hopefully they'll come in very quietly while we're talking. But it is my great pleasure to introduce two people who've joined us for a conversation that the college has been engaged in now for a little more than a year and a half. We have with us today, of course, our own Bell Hooks, who is Distinguished Professor in Residence in Appalachian Studies here at Berea College. Of course, Bell was born Gloria Jean Watkins in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and she has chosen the name Bell Hooks in lowercase as her pen name based on the names of her mother and her grandmother, to emphasize the importance of the substance of her writing as opposed to who she is. She is the author of over 30 books, many of which have focused on issues of social class, race, and gender. And her latest book, which hopefully most of you already have, is entitled Writing Beyond Race, Living Theory and Practice, and published in 2013. Please welcome our own Bell. Joining her today is John A. Powell, who is an internationally recognized expert in the areas of civil rights and civil liberties and a wide range of issues, including race, structural racism, ethnicity, housing, poverty, and democracy. He is the executive director of the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society, which supports research to generate specific prescriptions for changes in policy and practice that address disparities related to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomics in California and nationwide. He is a professor of law and professor of African American Studies and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Professor Powell also holds the chair as the Robert D. Haas Chancellor's Chair of Equity and Inclusion, and his latest book, which I hope you all have, is entitled Racing to Justice, also published in 2013. Please welcome Dr. Powell. There is no prescribed format for this luncheon. I know these two scholars can enlighten us much more than anything we could suggest, so it's really free-flowing and with Bell directing the conversation, so thank you both.
I've been directing John's conversation for quite some time. We worked together at Ohio State. I'm not a good sitter talker, but I was looking through my paper to try to find for us a definition of justice. Dr. King was really constantly reminding us that justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. John says in his book that justice is the public face of love. So those are interesting ways to begin. Why don't you say something more while I find my definition?
See, there goes Bell trying to direct me again. It's a delight to be here, and I always enjoy spending time with Bell, and I've learned a lot from her, and look forward to the next day and a half, and I hope I come back and get Bell out to Berkeley sometime. I think that how we think about justice and how we think about our relationships is actually quite important. I think the way it orients our life. And my more recent work, and I'm working on a book this summer that the whole book is on the relationship between social justice and spirituality. And to me, it's clear and increasingly being supported by all the disciplines that we're deeply interrelated with each other, with Earth, with life. And then the question becomes, what's the proper form of the relationship? It's not enough to be related, but what's the proper form of relationships? And I think the concept of justice and love informs us what's the proper relationship we should be aspiring to. How's that, Bill?
That was good, but I would like John to stand, even though he's so much taller than me. Are you more comfortable sitting?
I can stand.
Okay.
You want to see me?
Yeah.
yeah. Or was especially for you, Val.
Keep talking.
Or what else? That's it, right? I will say one other thing as Val looks through her notes. As you know, those of you who looked at my book, my work's been informed by a lot of things, including the mind science and how we think of structures and systems and theories of connections. And so it seems to me that a lot of the work we do happens outside of our deliberate conscious space, that we're finding more and more in terms of we live in systems and structures, we live in stories. In some ways we could say those stories live in us. And so part of the thing is to open up and soften, to think about how all these things are related. And I know you've been having conversations here about race. And you know, it's interesting to me because I think we're in a rapid period of changing racial identity. And I'll go further and say we're in a rapid period of changing identity, period. In fact, I suggest that the way we think about race in this country and the work it does is actually very closely associated with our identity, period. And that we're actually going through a rapid change. A change will be at times challenging. For some people it'll be hopeful, for some people it'll be scary. But how we think about it, the structures we build around it, the culture we build around it, the spiritual grounding, all be very important as to what kind of people we'll be and what kind of society we have.
Can you give us an example, John?
Sure.
When you say our identities are going to change, just could you give us one example of what you mean by that?
Sure. You know, they're just, once you start looking for it, they're everywhere. So in a sense, our identities are constantly shifting, situational and social. So who we are, we can actually measure this now. So this is not just analytical work, it's actually empirical as well as historical work. And so you think of Zora Neale Hurston's, when she says, I only realized this black girl when I was around white people. So that being around interracial settings actually sharpens and exaggerates and makes a certain part of identity more salient. There's a book called In the Name of Identity, and the author suggests that the identity that becomes salient is the identity that's either celebrated or threatened. So you threaten people around their language, and all of a sudden their identity becomes salient and organized around language. You may wonder, for example, why certain people are...
So we're going to get blacker? Is that what you're telling us?
We may have to get blacker. And of course, what black is. You know, what does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? These are deeply, deeply social constructions and stories that's constantly being contested. So I'm old enough to have been born colored, and then I became, or a Negro, and then became black, and then became African American and Afro, and now we're going back to black. And I sometimes say Malcolm X may have been the first public black figure in the United States. And it was a different identity than being Negro. So being Negro and being black has a different social political setting. And Thurgood Marshall resisted. You know, he's like, no, I'm gonna be Negro. I'm not gonna be black. And finally, I think, capitulated. And think about what's going on in terms of black and African American. Almost 10% of black people in the United States today are not born in the United States. They're coming from the Caribbean and Africa. So they're not, at least in a, and we even talk about legacy African Americans, legacy blacks, right? What does that mean? But it means something. And so as we get more people who are recently from Africa and from the Caribbean here in the United States, it actually stirs up our identity in some interesting ways. And not always easy. There are sometimes tension between people of African descent recently and people of African descent a long time ago. And then think about, I was talking about this a little bit, I think last night or this morning, one of the fastest identities growing in the United States is oftentimes not talked about. 15% of Americans that marry today marry someone outside of their racial or ethnic identity. It's suggested that in 10 years, that number will be 25%. And many of those people have kids, right? And so we'll have a whole population that in some sense, in a very deliberate sense, will have a complicated identity. All of us have a complicated identity, but theirs would be at a very high level. My daughter was born in Tanzania. I say she's really African American. I got to get back because my niece is coming out to look at schools. She's been accepted to some schools in the Bay Area. She's coming out to visit schools. She was born in China, and she lives in Chicago. And she's a star on the Chicago basketball team. And one day she's playing a game and she's good. I mean, she's like point guard and shooting from all over the place. And people in the stands like, who is that girl anyway? And then they went on to say, what is she? And she heard them. And she stopped and she looked up and she said, I'm African American. You got a problem with that? And she comes out to the Bay Area. She's phenotypically Chinese. And she speaks with, quote unquote, a Chicago black accent. And the Chinese Americans are saying, why are you talking like a black girl? Her response is, I am a black girl. So our identities are constantly, they're being reformulated, contested, usually behind our back. But to some extent, I think it's important for us to be more deliberate about this.
Well, I mean, John, one of the things that I'm interested in is intersectionality. On one hand, these identities are shifting, but the question that is on the table for me is white supremacy changing? And what I see is that it's not. So that's interesting that on one hand, we have this sort of world, almost a subculture world, and especially among younger people, that identity doesn't mean all the things that it meant for us. And yet, we are still living in a world where white supremacy is on the rise. And I wanted to say this because it's real, and we're all participating in it. White supremacy is not a white thing, because every time we hold up Beyonce and her fake blonde tresses as a standard of beauty, we are participating in white supremacy. We, as people of color, as black people particularly. And so that is something that I feel we as collective brown and black people don't want to own. How invested we are in white supremacy. What we get from white supremacy. Why can't we let it go? Why can't we let color caste go? Why has it stuck to us so tenaciously from slavery to the present day? Lorraine Hansberry says it's the only thing that should discredit us in the eyes of our children. That young children are still agonizing over my skin is dark, that they're still using bleach. If you heard Lupita from the really, I thought, bad movie, 12 Years a Slave, but I stand alone, it seems, in thinking it was bad. I called it sentimental claptrap. My thing was, I don't see another black woman naked, raped, and beaten as long as I live. I'll be okay. Because again, thinking about things you say in the book, John, I don't think those images move us forward. I think those images actually lock us in a holding pattern. So that those images actually try to bring back black, an old sense of ourselves. You know, I was saying to somebody, I want to see a dull movie about a black female like myself. All she does is sit around reading and writing and longing for sex that she doesn't get to have. I mean, thank you, John. Because I think, again, all the time, what isn't changing? I mean, as you're talking about these fluid identities and things changing, why are we holding on to certain other things so strongly that actually keep us from really having the revolution of values, the beloved community that we can have?
Well, so I think what you said is actually very important. Let me just rip off for a minute. Although I'll take a slightly different take. I think white supremacy is changing. And I think two things.
Tell us how.
Well, first of all, I think race is actually only part of the story. Or it's a more complicated story than we normally situate it. Because I think when you go back to the formation of race in this country, at least in this colony, at the top of the food chain were the elites. And they were not white. They did not categorize themselves as white. So there were the elites, which were English, and they identified, self-identified as English, not identified as white. Then there were whites. Whites was the middle stratum. And then there were the racial other. And so the racial identity was actually for the non-elites. And the elites always had a different identity. And the middle stratum of whites were to serve the elites and to police the non-elites. It's not just a function, it's also their identity. So I think that that's important to sort of bring into the conversation. And this is my colleague and friend, Ian Haynes Lopez's new book, Dog Whistle Politics. The original title was Dog Whistle Racism. And we said that, you want somebody to read the book other than us. So we changed it to Dog Whistle Politics. But it's talking about how the elites are using the anxiety around the other to actually create space for corporate dominance in the world. And I use the anxiety about the other because the other, when you go to Europe, is not necessarily racialized in the same way. I was in France last summer, and people were saying, well, Guy, that we don't deal with race in France. And I said, but you have another. And that's all I said. I said, but you have another. And they said, oh, you mean the Muslims? I said, okay, you know who they are, right? And the role that that's playing is actually quite profound. Now, the wrinkle in a lot of this, of course, as we know, half the world, actually more than half the world, 60% of the world is Asian. Now, they have a whole different way of doing this. And it's challenging a lot of stuff. We're seeing it play out in just hundreds of ways. 5 years ago, something like 130 countries, the United States was a major trading partner, and 27 countries had China as the major trading partner. Today, that's completely flipped. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of not just the economics, but in terms of identity? I'm not sure, but I know it means something. And in fact, the New York Times ran an article, and the headlines of the article, this was about 2 years ago, said for the first time in 350 years, think about that, 350 years, the world will be led by a country that's not white and Christian.
But that is white supremacist, and that's going to be interesting.
But what they're saying is that our supremacy is being challenged. And it's interesting that they think 350 years, because I spent a little time in China. 350 years in China is like yesterday. Right. It's like, right. And your point is?
Yeah. I mean, we took a nap.
Yeah, exactly. We're waking up, But all I'm saying is that the white supremacy requires physical and structural manifestations as well as ideation. It's not just an idea. It has to be manifested in something. You know what I'm saying? All I'm really saying is that as we move into the future, I'm not saying it's a good future or a bad future, and there are different possibilities, but the future in terms of Britain and the United States and France and the Netherlands sort of colonizing the rest of the world, that's over. That is over. Now, what the new world's going to look like?
James Baldwin told us that. The world is white no longer and will never be white again.
That's right. So, but it's like a star burning out, right? A star burning out, as gets hotter and can do a lot of damage. So it's not clear if it's going to be a soft landing. Nor is it clear, frankly, I'm not, thinking that China is necessarily where I want to go. They do a lot of stuff that's very problematic. But it does mean we're in a rapidly changing world, a world where many of the ideas and many of the concepts, many of the things that we took for granted simply will not be true. What will be true is up for grabs.
Well, one thing that's clear, the rich are destroying the earth, and I think that they are that elite that you're talking about. And one of the things I think we have learned is that the rich like to stick together. Those 800 and some billionaires in the United States, and they do a better job of diversity. People always say Nixon would rather have sat down with Fidel Castro than any poor black person in the United States. Because really, at the end of the day, he felt as an elite, he had more in common with Castro than he would have with any old regular Negro, colored, ratchet person, you know. And so I think, again, John, my sense even about China is how white supremacy is woven into the aesthetic fabric of Chinese culture and history, so that we may have Chinese dominance, but we won't necessarily be doing away with white supremacy. I think of a little girlfriend, Chinese, adopted. Recently, she tried to go back to China with her dad, white dad, to visit. The Chinese would not allow her into the country. They said that she's not really Chinese and she doesn't need to come to China. I mean, I think that policing of certain notions of identity and policing through and against the frame of white supremacy. So that's what I think you're going to have both. Policing through identities and at the same time the stability of white supremacy. I mean, let's face it, white supremacy has proven to be extraordinarily stable, especially around questions of aesthetics. What we perceive to be beautiful, what we perceive to be desirable. And we'll talk some about the role spirituality plays in that. He'll wash me white as snow. I mean, I think about that so much because both of us are deeply spiritually devoted people, and yet so much of the rhetoric of traditional Christianity is mired in a certain representation of white supremacy. I'm honored to be here with my two sisters, the younger Watkins girls. Gwenda, who just moved after 36 years in Flint, Michigan, back to our hometown, Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Dr. Valerie, we said that when she first came here, people used to say, Bell Hook's sister, Dr. Valerie. I came back and they said, Bell Hook's Dr. Valerie's sister. She's having a tremendous impact on our campus, on our students. I saw you guys ringing the imaginary bell on her behalf. And I was thinking about the church that we grew up in that had a huge picture of white Jesus. And in front of white Jesus was a globe. And at the feet of Jesus was the people of color. And my brother asked me once, how do we get that image out of our head? How do we, and I think about one of the things I must admit that I enjoy about Buddhism is that there are just so many different colors of Buddha. And I have shaped sizes, the female Buddha. I have all these Buddhas in my life, and I tell people it's because when I go to TJ Maxx and Ross Dress for Less, the Buddhas say, "Don't leave me here, girl. I wasn't meant to spend my life at TJ Maxx. Girl, I'm on sale finally." Because I have this big painting of a Buddha and my brother, and I struggled to bring it home. It was so huge from Ross Dress for Less, and the price kept going down and down. But that is one thing that I'm constantly struck by as I look at the array of Buddhas in my many homes, is that they're just all different colors. They're amazing colors of green and red. And as an African-American spiritual person, I enjoy. I mean, I have Jesus in my house, black Jesus that I got from Guatemala or someplace, suffering on the cross. So, I mean, it's interesting to think again about how can we fundamentally shift white supremacy if we can't fundamentally shift our thinking about the representation of Jesus, God. And the same to me, I mean, as a militant feminist for all these many years, I try always to think about different kind of language. At the same time, every day of my life, I chant to the 23rd Psalm. But how do I embrace the Lord that is my shepherd without without embracing patriarchy. And so that's again, we see the thread of domination that remains in our language, that remains in our thought processes. And I think of my brother saying he's having a crisis with spirituality. He can't get that white man out of his head. Do we need to image our gods?
Well, you know, a couple of things. And this one, we may not resolve this lunch. But, see, I agree with in the United States, the role of white supremacy and the role of whiteness will actually, it morphs, but it morphs with some stability. This is what Bill and Derek and others talk about. But I think, so what is whiteness? So what do we mean by, if it's a social construct, if it's not just phenotypical, what is it? And I think the performance of whiteness is about a kind of dominance, is a kind of separation, is a kind of relationship to each other and the earth, is a Christian, is Protestant in the United States, the expression of that. And now just think about that. So we talk about, Bill, you talk about getting God out of the white God out of our head. Well, the Chinese have already done that. They don't have a white God in their head. That's not their issue. So all I'm really saying is that we have to pay attention, not ignore what's going on here, but what's going on here is not all that's going on anymore. There's a whole lot of people. In fact, quick story, my father's a Christian minister. He's 93 years old. He doesn't have a church anymore, but he still preaches. I left the church when I was 11.
Yes, John.
And I left because...
Oh, you're going to tell the China
I'm
story?
going to tell the China story. Bill heard this, but the rest of them haven't. Bill, you tell the China story.
No, come on.
So I'm reading, you know, about the time it's like a little under 1 billion Chinese. There's only about 3 billion people in the world. And I figure out that most of them, 1, don't know Jesus, 2, don't care to know Jesus, and 3, are not going to be baptized. So from the faith of my father, it means they're going to hell. And I'm saying, that seems strange, that 1/3 of the world is going to hell because they've never heard of Jesus. Now, we're years later in this, 1.6 billion Chinese, still most of them haven't adopted Jesus. So what I'm really saying is that, and then when you sort of start thinking about what they think about, which is hard to do because we think differently, you know, Confucianism is quite profound in terms of their culture, in terms of their religion. It's a religion without a God. And it will affect us. That's all I'm saying. In this deep relationship, it's not going to be one way. And I'm not saying it's a good way or a bad way. I'm saying it's a different way. Because up until recently, the United States, Britain, Europe could impose on China, India, the rest of Africa. It's our way. That's the only way it is. It's our way. And that was the heyday of the 19th, early 20th century. That's not the 21st century. And I'm not saying China is beyond it, but I just spent some time in China. You go there, first of all, two interesting facts. 85% of Chinese think their government is headed in the right direction.
And they're all shorter than John.
You know, and less than 40% of Americans think our government is heading in the right direction. You hear this sort of palpable malaise. It's like, you know, the best is behind us already. They're this sort of like, they're saying the 21st century is their century. So I'm saying this is interesting dynamics that we have to deal with. A concrete example. I looked at Cleveland. Cleveland, a black city. They had a huge meltdown in terms of subprime lending. The housing went belly up. Everybody's underwater. They're trying to figure out how to do it, what to do about that. Someone brings a lawsuit, and they say, we want to modify these loans. It turns out that more than 25% of their loans in Cleveland was held by the Chinese. And that's Cleveland. So if that's true in Cleveland, it's true everywhere in the country. And the court said, you have to bring these people into court in order for me to do this. And they said, they don't know who these people are. But they are undergirding our economy in some profound ways that we think, so it's not abstract, right? It's that we turn around and it's like, really? You mean I can't do this? So I just think we have to enlarge in the conversation and frankly get out of the European-centric conversation. Europe has been the center of whatever, modernity, but that period is actually coming apart. And that's what I try to suggest in my book, and that's why I think we really are talking about the spinning out, the coming apart of the Enlightenment project, which is the European Whiteness project. That project won't hold. It will still be influential, but it will have to contend with other projects.
But you would agree that because of precisely of what you're saying, people are trying to hold on to white supremacy precisely because of the shattering of so much of the forces that have held it together with ease.
I think that's right. And I would even go further and say, as the challenge of that, and I think that we're going to see increased anxiety in this country. Anxiety about diversity, anxiety about Chinese, anxiety about Latinos, anxiety about African Americans, in part because in order to hold whiteness in space, in place, you have to hold everybody else in a certain place as well. Whiteness requires not just a space and place for white folks, but it means that everybody else has to stay in place. That's what it's predicated on. When other people get out of their place, whiteness becomes nervous. And you're seeing that. If you look at it, the country's becoming more diverse, but where the Tea Party rules is actually becoming more homogeneous, it's becoming whiter. So these people are trying very hard to hold the ocean back. They won't be able to. And I think we have to sort of offer an alternative, as well as fight the old system, but to offer an alternative. And I think that's part of our project.
I'm going to just take a station break and say he didn't complete the China story. Because the real thing about the China story is the imprint of the man who would become John Powell, which is, at his church, there was always a period where one could ask questions. So bold little 11-year-old John wanted to know, are all these people going to go to hell because they don't believe in Jesus? He was punished for that questioning.
I left the church and my father didn't talk to me for 5 years. I felt like I couldn't stay there, right? But, and the church couldn't answer the question. You know, the sort of ethical foundation of Christianity was bumping up against, and I didn't have a complete language, and I hadn't been introduced or read bell hooks at that early age.
It was coming.
Now me and my father get along well, and we do read bell hooks.
I just thought that, I think about people like John and myself in terms of identities, and to me that's a very formative identity story for John. What it did to him, how it changed his perspective of reality. So I didn't mean to take us away from the larger story, but I find that story one of very compelling, and both compelling and very sad. I mean, can you imagine your dad just feeling like you're a total traitor? And we know there are a lot of Americans, black and white and other colors, who would think he's a traitor in speaking of China as he's doing today. Because they don't see it that way. They don't really see, they still see China in the old racist, xenophobic way. I'm thinking, how can we bring some of this home to where we are, Berea College, and how best we might do that? Would we do that best through seeing if people have questions? I mean, we as a college are in the midst of a struggle around identity, in the sense of whose college is it? Whose Appalachia is it? Whose faith? I did not hear Lyle's talk at the chapel, but what I heard was he was saying, if this is wrong, that Christianity was that we need lots of faith, but Christianity is a stabilizing core. Didn't nobody heard that? Well, all I can say, if it's the stabilizing core, we're in trouble. So, I mean, shall we'll see whether you guys have questions that are more, tie us into Berea media or to what's happening with institutions. John, previously, he's only been in California almost a year. He was the director of the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State, where they did a lot of mapping of these things. I was explaining to my sister how they mapped a lot of cities around foreclosures, and that you could see how race played such a role in determining whether you would be foreclosed on or not. Did you have something else, John, you want to say before?
Well, the stories we tell are really important. So right now, I just came back from Detroit, hosting a conference on financially distressed cities around the country. And everybody's heard of Detroit going bankrupt. But people haven't heard that there are over 100 cities across the country actually in the same lane going bankrupt. Fiscal, Puerto Rico, LA, Chicago. And the story that we get with Detroit is that, well, you know, there was this hip hop mayor, and there, you know, black people don't know how to deal with money. And as I say to people, we got over 100 cities. Well, Kilpatrick wasn't the mayor of all of them. There's something fundamentally structural going on in terms of municipal financing. There's also a strategy. The right wing is using that as a way of attacking unions, as well as a way of attacking people of color. Wall Street is using it to, it's the new subprime. It's municipal subprime. And we're not getting to that story because we're focused on Kilpatrick. We're focused on the black man did it, right? So it's, and we lost a lot of ground in terms of the subprime crisis because we didn't notice, because it was happening in the black and Latino community. By the time it happened in the white community, it was happening everywhere. And I think it could be in the same trajectory in terms of municipal finance and pensions. And so it's the canary in the coal mine. And we're not paying, the canary, we're blaming the canary. That stupid canary, you know, as opposed to thinking about the air.
Well, and you know, and what may ultimately be the greatest challenge to white supremacy is the rich controlling the rest of us and people. I mean, part of what Occupy Wall Street did was bring into further consciousness that we are the class society, the caste class society we are morphing into. And so people could then actually think about not so much about race, but as about class and caste and how people would be situated. Because for the first time we did have images of white people on our television screens who were saying, you know, I've gone from being fully employed, owning my home, to being homeless, destitute, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is where we may have the white supremacist earthquake.
That's an important story to tell, and this is one to get out. And so I think we're in an interesting place, but I want to have a chance for you to join in the conversation if you want to.
Your name?
My name's Ann Bruder. I teach in the English department. I have a question about aesthetics, though. You said that when you were talking about 12 Years a Slave, you said, if I never saw another woman, black woman raped, beaten, that would be glorious, right, if you never saw that again. What do you do, though, about, should we still be teaching Harriet Jacobs? Should we still be teaching Toni Morrison, where my students confront those images that you're talking about, images of black women by black women? Is that a different thing altogether? How do we understand that kind of aestheticizing?
Well, but that aestheticizing is all about revolt.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that, to me, was very depressing about 12 Years a Slave, because those women are not in revolt. Those women are re-inscribed within the structures of racialized sexist domination. Whereas, you know, in Morrison, in Harriet Jacobs, there's this rising up of a subjectivity, you know, that is quite radically different. That's why I think media is so dangerous, because media has such an impact on us, images that we see, but in a different way. I mean, how many of us actually created images as we were reading incidents in the life of a slave girl? Or were we in fact charting her journey, her struggle? And that was more, important than how we would image her. But that's why media, the visual media is so incredibly powerful. I mean, just think, I would say to people, like, did we know what the wife was doing for those 12 years? And people would say to me, oh, but the book, she didn't have this presence in the book. That woman having sex with, what was his name? The man? Solomon wasn't in the book. But the filmmaker was able to insert that. And so, again, within a questioning feminism says, how come we can come up with a silent sexual scene, again, where we don't know what the woman's motive is, she doesn't have a voice, but we can't come up with 60 seconds of the wife saying, it was hard for me while you were gone, or it was whatever. So we have to be in a state of contestation with those images, but when we read these books, it's really not the same, because there is so much contestation of racialized sexism going on. Bonnie?
It's interesting that the first question was about 12 years a slave.
Well, not really.
That was my question too, in terms of, because of the power of the media and the fact that we've run from the topic of slavery for so long, in terms, especially black people, because it's so painful, we keep running from it. And when I think about race, I don't see us really having a conversation about race unless we have a conversation about slavery. I'm just now finding out about a doctrine of exclusion, which you may know. I just am hearing about it. This meritorious manumission, and how they are the foundations of exclude. Just doctrines. Let's exclude black folk. And just to present that to black people and white people to know that what slavery has done. I think there's a use for 12 years of slavery. I couldn't see it because I like you. It's too painful.
Well, but I think to say that we need to have a conversation, here's something I learned recently that I didn't know. I've been in my own spiritual retreat and studying Richard Foster's celebration of discipline. And the story that he tells in that book, that I'd much rather see than 12 Years a Slave, is the Quakers debating whether or not they can continue to support slavery. And he records some of John Woolman's active testimony when the Quakers decide that they cannot, according to their beliefs, continue to support slavery or own slaves. And the deeper thing that he told was they not only agreed to be anti-slavery, but to pay wages, back wages, to slaves. Now, to me, that's the kind of statement that tells us, first of all, white people can change, they can shift incredibly, and they can do it, as John and I will talk, especially tonight, around spiritual belief systems. Now, why don't we have more images of that? Which is still a conversation, Bonnie, about slavery, but it's a different kind of conversation about slavery. Because it is a conversation about slavery that says we have to acknowledge that black people are fundamentally human and fundamentally us. That it is a question of unity, which is, you write so much. I told John I liked the book in the beginning, but after my third reading, it got to be a bit tedious. But I think that I would agree, Bonnie, that we need to have a conversation about slavery, but the question is, what kind of conversation? One, I think, again, I said, if I had children, I would not want them to see this film because I feel like we are re-victimized again and again through images, that we are given the position of victim. And I think that that's one of the things that's hurting the collectivity of black people more than anything else in our society right now, is the sense of being a victim. I mean, we have this amazing history of resistance, of revolution, and we're stuck in the holding pattern of victimhood. And the Tea Party and everything in this culture is trying to constantly keep us in that victimhood, because that victimhood is part of the narrative of white supremacy too.
I think that's right. And the other
I'm always right, John.
but I don't always think you're right. But the other part, Toni Morrison talks about this, is that, so we sort of, I think the narrative of slavery and the history of slavery is quite important in some ways that we actually haven't begun to really unearth. I tried to at least think about how race and slavery affect the institutional design and culture of our society. Period. Not for black people, not for white people, not for the whole country. This is what America is. And we can't understand America without understanding that. And so, obviously, it has a special place for black people, but it actually has a powerful place for white people, which most people don't get. I was teaching a course, and I was talking about the Europeans taking the Native Americans' land. This was in Minnesota. And one of my white students raised his hand and said, "Why are we studying Native American history? This is not supposed to be a Native American history class." And I said, "This is not Native American history, this is your history." If we want to study Native American history, we have to go back before Europeans came. That's Native American history. This is European history. This is American history. This is how you became America. And so we actually don't study about the creation of the concept of whiteness in America, which is about slavery. Not just in terms of identity, as powerful as that is, but also in terms of our cherished institutions, the way we think about property, the way we think about states' rights, the way we think about electoral college, the way we think about welfare, the way we think about the economy, the whole design. There's a book by Ira Katznelson called Fear Itself, and he writes about the New Deal. He talks about there were 4 great fears in America, and one of them was around race, and that affected everything. It affected the way we think about the proper role of government in an economy. Where Europe thinks that government can be involved in the economy, America thinks that government cannot. That's not legitimate. Democrats don't think that, Republicans don't think that. That is driven by fear around racial anxiety. So I agree with you, but I think we have to go much deeper. When we go deeper, we find out we're not just talking about black people, we're talking about everyone here.
And we're having been a different conversation. A conversation in the direction of liberation, a conversation in the direction of possible bonds and of solidarity and understanding. Maida?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about education for liberation, but I thought I'd put it in terms of Berea College, since you had asked earlier for Berea College.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My question is this. Are we educating students for white supremacy? And if we're not, where are we not educating? What could we be doing better? And what I mean by that is we're educating students to be successful in the system as it is, but we don't really educate them about the system as it is. We talk about race, but we don't talk about, I don't think we talk as much about supremacy. And even talking about race, we're not entirely successful. Look at all these tables over here. And this is, and if we had a convocation, people would write on the convo card, too much stuff about race, too much stuff about black people.
Talk about it,
I
Maida.
exempt myself from this question, but I really would like to hear what both of you have to say about how you educate for liberation in the confines of a college, even a college that's so clear about its racial heritage and so clear about its economic heritage.
But the thing is, that's precisely what Berea isn't clear about. I think that as one charts the history of Berea, we begin with revolution. And we begin with a vision of unity, of beloved community. And when that gets broken by the use of Christianity what did we say the day law. You have, in therapy we call that split mind. So suddenly you have a Berea that betrays itself and its foundations because it did not say, well, we refuse to change. Even if we end up with just an acre of land and a cob house, or we will stand on our principles. So that really, we have the beginning of a Berea that gives in, it was all about money on one level, and the intersection of race and economics, which are going to continue to exert a certain force on Berea. So that revolutionary Berea, that is so awesome. I mean, you cannot study the roots of Berea College without being amazed by the vision that was happening here. And then, you know, along comes white people like Larry Shin, whose intentionalities are not to uplift that vision and further realize it, but in fact are to flip the vision. So we are no longer dedicated to certain principles in our actions. We may say it in our verbal stuff, but we're more concerned with being the top-notch liberal arts college of the South. And so when we begin to use that language and have that vision made, we're right into white supremacy. When we're talking about that Berea can be a Yale, Berea can be a Harvard, I mean, these are some of the institutional bastions of white supremacy. And there's no revolutionary vision, and the revolutionary vision begins to recede. So the very fact that we could have white professors and white students coming here thinking, why should they have to think about race? That's a continuation of the betrayal. Because the whole fabric and foundation of Berea College is anti-racism, anti-sexism at its foundation. And of course, I mean, it's the question that Anne raised. How do you exist within a certain structure, you know, of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, and at the same time resist and revolt, or hold on? How do we hold on to that Berea vision in light of a world that's changed? I mean, you know, John Fee wasn't worried about the stock market and his investments in the stock market. The Berea of today is very concerned about money and investments, et cetera, in a totally different way. So that is part of, I believe, the challenge of a new vision for us, is to how to bring that. I think of Jung's notion of the shadow self, that much of what's happening at Berea now is the shadow self at play. And the self, the core self, is what has receded. How do we bring it back to the front, not just in rhetoric and in speech, but in actual actions? I was thinking about myself. My coming to Berea was so much a part of wanting to be back where I came from. That girl who ran the hills of Kentucky. In many ways, as John found his freedom in the church, as a girl, I found my freedom in the hills of Kentucky. As a very, very young girl, the idea of my strength, my equality, my being on a par with my brother, who I ran in those hills with. I wasn't like Valerie. She let the brother convince her that she could roll into a ball and he could roll her down the hill. She has the scars on her leg. But for me, when I think of that history, I think of the power in those hills, the vision of lawlessness, of there being, I think of my pastor at Virginia Street Baptist Church preaching to us that there is a world beyond law. The world of godliness and power and justice and love of justice. And I'm always fascinated that both King and Malcolm found in spirituality the force. Whether you agree with Malcolm or not, it was as a spiritual transformed person that he rose to be a warrior for justice. King, as a spiritual, I mean, Dr. King is such a mentor for me when he talks about, you know, that there came that moment in his life where he had to say, how can I say that I worship a God of love and support war? And that was a transformative moment in his life where he meditated on Romans, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may know what the will of God is. I mean, it's an awesome history. And it's going to be King that's really going to be the prophet telling us about the rise of fascism through militarism, new technologies, etc., that we're not listening to. But I think to myself, Maida, I think on this a lot, being a Berean till the day that I die, is what can flip that switch? How do we move back as an institution that has become more mired in the things of this world to the kind of vision that John Fee had for us? What kind of concrete institutional things? I'm going to say what I talked to John last night. I said, John, one thing I know for true. We cannot change anything around race and diversity or sexism or homophobia if we're not willing to think outside the box. As long as all we can do is work within the box, we're just going to always have some version of the status quo. Yeah. How do you get beyond that? You know, and I'm not one of those people that thinks that you can get beyond it. We know the fact is money is short everywhere. We're not going to have this wonderful influx of diverse non-white professors here at Berea or at most small liberal arts colleges. So the question becomes then how do you create a beloved community in a context where, you know, it's never going to be done in that way of, you know, oh, we're going to bring all these enlightened people here and they're going to help us change. We are going to have to change. That went on a bit long. Anybody had some thought? Andrew?
Bill, you just talked about the founding of the institution and the core principles. But John T. Fee did operate in a box, and that was his Christian beliefs. And sometimes, as one of the older Bereans sitting in here, a little more perspective since 1969, I also have found that what we've done at Berea to a degree is we seemingly have wanted to throw Christianity out the window. And we got to remember, I think with my progressions of Berea history, the foundation of Fee and everyone else that came with it was their religious beliefs. So how do we fit that into it? Yeah, we could talk about all these other things, but Christianity is the foundation of everything.
Well, the radical Christianity, see, that's the issue, I think, the tension. Not a corporate Christianity,
Okay.
but a radical revisionist Christianity. I mean, that's what brought Fee here in the first place, the disputes about Christian principles and belief and how to best act them out. So I think that, yes, let's acknowledge that core, but let's acknowledge it as a liberation theology. I mean, I haven't read anything that talks about Fee in terms of liberation theology. But the man who felt that God called him to create this college and to create it as a utopian space of racial and gender equality, that was a radical Christianity. Because remember, it's that conservative fascist Christianity that's going to come in and crush the vision, or try to crush the vision. So the question is, how do we return to that liberation theology as a core? Because let's face it, just as we have professors and students coming here saying, why do I have to talk about race? we have people coming here with nothing but utter contempt for God and Christianity. And that changes the total flavor. I mean, that's why I say there's interesting Bereas, because there's different Bereas. When you talk to the people like Andrew and many people before him, their dedication to the college and their commitment is so impressive and so intense, and it makes you want to be here and come here. But then when you talk to the generations, so let's face it, how many white professors are here, not because they want to be a part of Berea, but because it was the only job they could get? You know, and that changes the nature. I was just at St. Norbert's in De Pere, Wisconsin, which is another Christian-based Catholic college. We were talking about these same issues about, you know, how do you hold on to certain traditions when the job market is such that you have many more people trying to enter your space that actually don't have the beliefs and the dedication to the values of that space. And that's a tension, and that's a tension that Berea, I think, probably has lived within more. I mean, Larry's whole vision of we need more people from Yale, we need more people from Harvard, was not like we need more people who fundamentally understand Appalachia. We need more people who fundamentally understand Kentucky, backwards, feudal, white supremacists to the max. And yet for those of us who are radical dissenting Kentuckians, we have tremendous hope because of our own lives, because of what Kentucky enabled us to become. You know, I'm here as bell hooks, not because of some intellectual academic world, but because of the spirit that flowed in that little girl in the hills of Kentucky that was affirmed in my church and in my family. So I think that's a big tension. Go ahead, John.
Well, you know, I don't know your college, so I can only speak on my own experience and what I do know about your college. But it does seem to me that having a vision and being clear on your vision is really important. And going back to your point in terms of people saying, I'm tired of talking about race, part of the thing that we do in this country is we define race narrowly, and then we dismiss it. So we say, among some of my progressive friends, it would be, I'm talking about the economy, or I'm talking about the environment. I don't have time to talk about race. But the economy and the environment is about race.
All right, come on.
And we can't, and I went to Greenpeace, which is probably one of the largest environmental group in the world. Basically, I said, you can't win on the environment unless we win on social justice.
Absolutely. Say that again, John.
We can't win on the environment unless we also win on social justice. They're so closely related. And so part of the project, I think, our project, is about, can we be humane? Can we be humane? Clearly we can't be humane if we're mired in white supremacy. Can we be humane? About education is about helping students and all of us to become human beings. Now if someone says, well, I'm tired of that project, then you need to go someplace else. Right? You don't belong, I don't know where you belong. But I would say you're not part of the project, right? So what happens though is people think, talking about race is talking about black people and their grievances. That's what they think talking about race is. They don't realize it's talking about all this stuff. And what's the vision forward? And so part of the project I think we have to do is start to be clear about, we won't get it perfect because we can't see that far. We can't see 1,000 years ahead. We can see maybe 5 years, the outlines, and the shadow of 10 years. Let's talk about that. And there are different possibilities. Which of those possibilities do we want to advocate for? What type of Christianity do we want to have? There's not one Christianity, there never has been. You know, remember Jesus, right? Jesus, right? He had to leave. He didn't can't come and say, you know, I want to come to destroy Judaism. It's like, this is what this means. If you are serious about love, if you're serious about my brother's keeper, and a lot of people, I say, when I'm talking to people of Christian faith, I said, there are a lot of people who believe not only are we not our brothers and sisters' keeper, there are many of us who believe our brothers and sisters are not our brothers and sisters. If you start from that premise, you know, why do you call yourself Christian? To me, that's sort of the foundation of Christianity. And yes, there will be tensions. There will be other disciplines like money, like prestige, like all these things. And then how you actually order those become important. And there's one quick story. I went to Stanford a long time ago when there were like 11, I think there were 23 black students at Stanford when I went there, out of the whole campus.
But I went there too, so Stanford must have been doing something right in its education.
Yeah, well, by 10 I'm sure they're about 100, right? But Stanford worried about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, it worried because it's of the elite schools. It was the first school that became majority non-white. And they were saying, what is this going to do to our funding base? Because the white people got the money and everyone's given, and I mean, we're not against, you know, having alumni of color, but we gotta, you know, we gotta pay bills. How are we gonna do this? Fast forward, Stanford is now majority non-white, and it has the largest annual endowment in the world, and has had that for the last 5 years.
All right.
So it had create this tension, because it was based on an old model. Only white people have money, only white people give. We actually know that in reality, everybody gives, and black people give the most. But it's based on this old notion. And a part of that, of course, is just the Silicon Valley is sort of taken off. The Silicon Valley is not just white people. So part of this, the fear was based on an old assumption that if we're going to survive, if we're going to thrive, we have to cater to rich white people as we knew them in the past.
And a book to read in conjunction with that is Bill Clinton's book, Giving. I mean, it's just, again, interesting how things are structured. I'll tell you just one story from that book that came to us via media, newspapers and things. Miss Osceola, who gave, the black woman maid, who gave University of Mississippi $150,000, I think. Well, that's what we heard in the news. The backstory was she gave that for scholarships for African American students. I mean, think about the difference in that reporting. Because a lot of black people got angry. Why is she giving that money to the University of Mississippi when she could have given it But the fact that she had a vision of how do I increase the presence of black students at the University of Mississippi, none of which white-dominated media, as I read it, brought. It told the story, but it didn't tell the backstory. Because the backstory would have involved race and wouldn't have made people feel as good about the maid giving her money. Because the way people read it is she was giving her money to whiteness. That's how black people read it too. And so, in fact, she was giving her money as a radical intervention. Awesome. We sing her praise and lift up her name. Your question, your name?
Sandy Holster, Developmental Math Department. NPR reported this morning on the California university system and how Asian students are now above their percentage of representation in the state as students. And yet, Hispanics and African American numbers have decreased drastically because of recent actions. So the Stanford model is nice to have one example, but then you've got a statewide system that seems to be going the opposite direction. And what can be done? How do you resolve that with Stanford's progress?
Well,
Having just accepted your big job at Berkeley.
so yes, the California system, the largest plurality are Asians. And the California legislature just tried to introduce a bill to repeal 209, which is the anti-affirmative action bill in California. And the biggest pushback against it was from Asian Americans. And it created all kinds of confusion, because it's like people of color against people of color. I got tripped on one of the largest Asian television programs in the country. They're interviewing me, and then here comes an Asian American mom with her son saying, basically, my son works hard, he's an all-A student, and if you change this, he's not going to be able to get into elite schools and instead you're gonna let these other people in who don't work as hard. So that was her story, right? And it's like she has this young man, very handsome, strapped and standing there, you know, like he's hardworking. So this is about, and what I said to her on television was, I have no doubt that your son works hard. I think he's very smart. But I can't believe anyone in the country works harder than the young men and women who spend half the day picking our food and the other half the day going to school. And if those students, despite that, have the wherewithal to succeed in Berkeley and UCLA, we should find a way to make it happen. And we've created this false scarcity. We found a way to build more prisons, but not to build more schools. And we say that our most important resource are students, are young people. Who would say, you know, I have too much money? Who would say, I have too much good health? If you have a good thing, why aren't we investing in it? Instead of saying, no, we have 5. We can take 10 students, that's it. I mean, you guys decide. I also think we have to have a vision. I mean, part of the thing, this was a, white people sort of followed on it all the time, right? They were saying, and I said this years ago, they were saying we should have this merit-based way of selecting students. We should not be subjective. We should have a way, a merit-based way. And we're still it, right? We think the thing that's most objective in our society is math. And I can tell you, because I have friends at Berkeley and other places who are theoretical mathematicians, it's not objective. It starts breaking down as well as other things. So they said, let's just take the math test, right? That was actually to keep the blacks and Latinos out. And then they instituted the exam, and within a short period of time, it was clear that the people who were going to best on it were Asian Americans. It's also interesting, the narrative around it. When you say black people don't do as well, they say that's because they're not smart. So then, white people don't do as well. So well, that's because Asians work so hard. I don't even know. The white people in California are quietly trying to change the way we select students for elite colleges, going away from math. Now they're saying we should have written exams that focus on literature.
White people literature.
Yeah. So it's like they're trying to cook the books. So at the end of the day, when the books are settled, white people are the ones benefiting the most. Now the real thing is that there's a very serious problem with the way we select students. We know a lot of students can do the work, and we're not letting in. We have too many students and not enough spaces. And in an inclusive democratic society, we should address that. The last thing I'll say is that it used to be that we thought of education in 2 important ways. We thought of education as learning to actually take the perspective of the other. Now that's Jefferson and Dewey.
Wow.
Education was about making citizens, and citizens was learning to take the perspective of the other. It was what we now call multiculturalism or something like that, diversity. And it was
John, I'm going to interrupt to say, I just finished an essay where I'm talking about how, when I was growing up in the state of Kentucky, they would have these little voice of democracy contests. That in our all-black schools and then in the integrated schools, we were led to philosophically contemplate, what do we mean by democracy? What do we mean by being a citizen? What is justice? So those issues right there were part of that backwards education that we got in Kentucky. You know, that people thought wasn't good enough, but there was that sense that I needed to know what democracy meant, what justice meant. And children don't get that now.
Right. Well, that's very important. I mean, these are important questions. And I'll just give you 2 other twists on this. The public resource that's scarce is not as scarce as we think it is. We need to expand it. But if we have a scarce public resource and we have to give it to someone, how do you do that in democracy? And John Rawls basically says, when you take a public resource and give it to someone based on scarcity, you give it to that someone as a trustee for the whole. So that public education, yeah, we may need a brain surgeon, but that brain surgeon, we're not trying to elevate this one person. We're actually saying you are in service. You're getting some scarce resource to serve the larger good. That's not the way we think about education now. It's like, it's yours. And if you make a $20 billion, that's yours too. That's a broken system. That system simply cannot work and sustain itself. And so we need to think about education in the context of democracy and in the context of public good. And I think that would actually then soften those questions about what about Asians, what about blacks? Who are you serving when you come out? What good are you doing? If you're not doing any good, then why are you taking up the space?
Well, see, and I think that hits us hard in Berea, because that's, if we can return to that kind of fundamental vision. I mean, I was speaking yesterday, you know, we all as professors have students that make us feel proud of where we are and what we're doing. And I've had my students here at Berea, but particularly Paige, who is finishing her PhD in Virginia, who went back to the world that she grew up in and is working in mental health there, making conscious choices and finishing her PhD. And I feel when I speak with her, this is Berea. This is what I came to Berea. Paige is white, single mom, and yet Berea allowed her a chance for transformation and for whole self-building. And that is what the true mission of Berea College is. The question for us and the challenge for us is how to reaffirm that mission in all ways. In administrators, you know, and Lyle taking a picture of his bologna sandwich. I'm not sure that that's his fried bologna sandwich. You know, the things that we can say, again, the symbolic representations of a pro-Appalachia or whatever you, what are the concrete manifestations? When was the last time somebody was hired at Berea that we said, we broadcast, because we gossip like crazy, because we ain't got no liquor, we ain't got no... When was the last time somebody said, we hired this person because of their amazing commitment to our project here at Berea College, because of their incredible vision of what they might do while they're here? Come on, when was the last time we heard that? As the raison d'etre, as our reason for being. That didn't list everybody. Because I'm tired of people complaining. I want to know, what have you done? What have you done for the students lately? What have you done in the service of that vision? I mean, and I think that's a challenge for all of us. That's a constant challenge for somebody like me. Another question before, as we roll on towards 1 o'clock?
Well, just one comment I just felt when you said that, it made me think of something a friend of mine said. It's like, what's our vision? What's our dream? And the reason that one of Dr. King's most important speeches is, I have a dream, instead of, I have a complaint. So we have to actually put the dream out there and let that be our guidepost to the future. We don't have a dream, well, we have a complaint. I'm not saying complaints are bad, but that doesn't orient us in the right way that a dream or a vision does.
And we have to make the difference between a critical observation and a complaint. Because critical evaluation is essential to any project of growth. But it's not the same thing as complaint. Sue?
Yes, I'm Sue Romano from Counseling. And my question is, I'm really struck with what you said, Val, is that we can't wait for people to come in and do this work for us if we're going to change. You know, we're not going to attract a lot of, you know, people of color and so on and so forth. And, you know, asking our admissions folks to work really harder to bring in, you know, more students of color, that kind of thing. I think there's some limitations to that. But the thing that strikes me is in Berea's history is that within 10 years, Frost changed this college. 10 years. And it's like, okay, we can look out maybe 10 years, and I'm thinking, what can we do? You know, if he can do it, why can't we? And I also realized that there was a strong economic, so maybe that was the box that he had to work within, and that's part of it. But, you know, wow, 10 years he changed this college. What if we, you know, what do we need to do to change it that drastically in 10 years? Or was it just that, you know, he rode the tide?
Well, instead of having committees discussing the great commitments yet again, what would it mean if we actually had commitments. Because that's the heart of text. We can discuss the commitments again and again and again. But to think about how do we realize the vision? What are the concrete steps that we can take? Some of you know I'm trying to have a bell hooks center, because rather than sit around and complain that ain't nobody interesting for me to talk to in Berea, I can bring people like Gloria Steinem, Cornell West, Rick Lowe, and we can have amazing conversations. But I have to have a plan. I have to have a course of action. I have to have the will to do the work. And I think that that's something that would be really fascinating for the college to select people who say, I have 100% commitment to the true revolutionary vision of Berea College. What would have to change right now? Lyle didn't seem impressed when I had lunch with him and said, these are the people I would fire. And I give it to Lyle that he's a good poker player, because he didn't blink or acknowledge in any way that he heard me and my rationale. So I think we should close, and people can have John sign your book if you want. Randall wants to say something first. Yeah.
Randall Roberts, English Department, General Studies, and Convocation Program. And I'll speak for convocations for a moment. I think through the convocations program we have this great opportunity, and I think we've been somewhat successful in bringing these diverse voices to campus. And I think what's happening right now should happen at a convocation next year. And I would love to talk with Belle and John, both of you, about bringing this back next year to a convocation so you can speak to our student body.
Okay, Randall, I agree with you, and I think that many of us feel like the convocation helps us live in Berea because they're so wonderful and they bring so many different things. My feeling about the students is before students make it to a convocation, if I was on that visionary planning committee, students would have to understand, you know, that John Fee had people sign a covenant. I mean, students would have to have an initial foundation, education, and critical consciousness about what Berea is about, because white and students of color come here with no real understanding of Berea's mission and what it's about. So I think that me and John standing up and they would just be like, when is this going to end? You know, I mean, there has to be an education from the very beginning, so that people that would lead someone not to have to say, as we know white folks have said, why do I have to come here and deal with race or black students or what have you? Because they would know from the education they received in, one of the many thousands of workshops at the beginning of the year, that this is what this place is about. And perhaps in the future we're going to have better literature that educates people as to what this place is about, so that rather than trying to get more unconscious students to come here, we would actually, hopefully, get more conscious students. We thank you for your presence, and some of you we'll see later. Eat, drink tea, chat with John. Okay, go ahead.
We have 5 impressive, I think I counted right, students in the room. And I've always felt at Berea College somehow we talk about being student-oriented, but we don't listen to them enough. And maybe you can be a catalyst for changing that.
Do you have anything to say that I would listen to?
No,
I'm teasing. Just teasing. Okay, I'm going to have to tell you guys, I don't believe we can have the revolution without humor. Because laughter, I think, is important in the lifting of us up. I think laughter is important when we come together to deal with the difficult issues and conflicts and sorrows and griefs. Because the one word John and I did not use around white supremacy was trauma. But people of color have experienced, and black people in particular, major traumas, and we have deep and profound grief. And we are the people in this nation who have been example to everybody about how you can take your grief and use humor and change it and transform it and allow it to be a solace to your soul. If some of you were wondering why I was so witty and funny. See you later.
All right. Can we once again thank our guests for their time? I mentioned to you earlier, this is the first major conversation. We are, the Carter G. Woodson Center here at Berea College is in the process of developing these conversations with some very dedicated faculty and staff and students, working toward the national conversation on race here at Berea campus, May 2016. So we will be working with John and Belle and others to continue this conversation. Berea has always been a leader. We want to keep that going. So for those of you who want your book signed before the bell leaves.
I just came over to stand with my girl.
Okay. All right, so they both have agreed if you have your books, they're going to sign them. Is there any particular place you would like to seat yourself, John?
Not wherever it's convenient.
Okay, you want to use this table, and then if you want to come up and have your book signed, and thank all of you for being such a great audience.